All right, we are live, I think, or close to it. We are now streaming. So
Okay.
there will be a delay.
Telling us that. It's the webinar is now streaming live. Okay. Okie
So
dokie.
welcome to everyone to the continuing series of the High Fantasy Tracks, taking on Virtual Dragon Con. So we're glad that you're here with us. We are going to go around the screen here in a minute, but just a word of welcome as we focus on the worlds of Narnia today, and it's the fact that Narnia has hit 70 here in 2020. So I'm Jim Wirt. I'll be moderating this panel. I'm on the High Fantasy Track staff and have been a long time both member of staff as well as panelist presenter type. And I'm just an amateur compared to some of the rest of these folks on here. So we're glad that you're with us. I'll be moderating today. I came to Narnia very young. One of those read it as a child sorts of things. And then we've been reading it over and over again, including out loud, assigning parts to all of our kids who are now grown up. So we love Narnia. So Laura, tell us about you.
Hi, Dragon Con. I'm Laura Grabowski. I am also known as Valdis Longbeard, the executive director of MiddleEarthNews.com. I also read Narnia as a child. Interestingly, I read it after I read Lord of the Rings, which I started reading at age 8. So that may be a little different kind of reading order. Like Jim, I also have had the opportunity as a parent to introduce my children to Narnia as well through the years.
Dakota.
Hi, my name is Dakota Kraut. I am an author and the owner of Mountain Dale Press. I came to Narnia as a kid, for me, obviously. And I love those stories. They were probably the first fantasy stories that I read in my whole life. And so I have a deep-seated love for Narnia. First time I've been on a panel for it. So, take it easy on me, but I'm looking forward to it.
And running anchor on this relay is Constance Wagner.
Okay. I am Constance Wagner. I'm a longtime Dragon Con participant from the old Tolkien track and now for the High Fantasy track for the last few years. I'm a Tolkien scholar working on a book and articles, the usual drill when one is a scholar in this way. I'm also a writer of fiction and poetry, besides being a college professor. And what's in back of me, my back right now, is a picture of Christ Church College in Oxford. Okay, I thought that was appropriate for today. My experience with Narnia is something I read as an adult. When I finally decided it was time to look at more of C.S. Lewis, I had read his Periolandra books earlier and some of his Christian apologetics. But my most recent experience with C.S. Lewis's work has been teaching it. I did a class last spring called Epic England, where we looked at various things that covered moments in English history, including stories that would reflect something of an epic quality. And we had decided that The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe fit into that. And it was also a travel class. So we got to go to C.S. Lewis's home outside of Oxford that past spring. And that was very interesting. And you'll be happy to know there is a wardrobe at the end of the hall, okay, which is like, they're insisting, well, it's not the wardrobe, it's not going to open into Narnia, but it's what you expect it to look like. So it's pretty fascinating. The house itself is full of warrens of rooms. So I can see where it would set off people's imagination. So it's kind of a fun connection.
So inquiring minds want to know, Constance, did you actually check the wardrobe? Did you?
I got as close as they would let me for where the docent said, Professor Wagner, okay, you really should not go too close to it.
So, yes. Professional, you should have access.
I know.
So, here's how we're going to run this panel. This is a conversation. It's a 70th anniversary kind of retrospective. And so we're going to pose and work through various kinds of questions, a lot of them rooted in what explains the continuing popularity of Narnia. We're going to try to save some time at the end for a few of our favorite rants about Narnia. And so that's really an invitation to everyone who's watching with us on the YouTube stream, or if you're going to watch this afterwards in its recorded version, you can still have comments kinds of things. So we encourage you to ask questions or drop your own comments. We've got some of our High Fantasy Track staff who are monitoring those, and they're going to be feeding that over into this live panel as well. So we hope that this will be an interactive experience for you. In some cases, I'm going to throw up some, well, I'm not going to throw up. I'm going to throw up.
No hot dogs, okay.
We were talking about Dragon Con and all of the traditions we're missing, like really stale and overcooked hot dogs. So the 70th year retrospective or celebration, we'll put a few of these graphic images up, but mostly we'll just open it up and have a chance to talk. Just some setup as we get going, a little bit of history and the reason that we're celebrating. The Chronicles of Narnia, the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe was first published in 1950. So happy 70th anniversary to Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe. And then one per year for the next 6 years, 7 total, we saw new Narnia books published. Some of you may even have been around that long who are watching them, probably not. For Lewis, he conceived it as a book in 1939, and he actually had this image of a fawn carrying an umbrella and parcels of a snowy wood, even much earlier, as he was beginning to nurture his creative mind. And what he said is that suddenly Aslan came bounding into it, and the whole story began to pull together. I'm wearing my shirt is from the Eagle and Child, and Lewis, as I'm sure most of you know, was part of a writers and critique and just general Oxford group that would get together nearly weekly and talk about what they were writing. And some speculate that one of those inklings, Charles Williams' novel, The Place of the Lion, could have been a possible influence for him. 120 million copies sold, a whole bunch, in more than 45 languages. So, very popular book. We wanted to set the table a little bit with inspiration. One of the critiques that Lewis received, and that Narnia still receives, it's kind of this forced allegory of just a lot of good moral lessons that good Christian children should be reading, and it's sneaky that way, but the funness of the story comes in. So I wanted to give you quickly this quote from Lewis on his source of inspiration as we get going. And I'll just read it out. Some people seem to think that I began by asking myself how I could say something about Christianity to children, and then fixed on the fairy tale as the instrument, and then collected information about child psychology, and decided what age group I'd write for, and then drew up a list of basic Christian truths and hammered out allegories to embody it. This is all pure moonshine. I couldn't write in that way at all. Everything began with images: a fawn carrying an umbrella, a queen on a sledge, a magnificent lion. At first, there wasn't even anything Christian about them. That element pushed itself in of its own accord. I fell in love with the form. He's talking about the fairy tale itself, its brevity, its severe restraints on description, its flexible traditionalism, its inflexible hostility to all analysis, digression, reflections, and gas. And in some of our preparation conversations, we talked about how that severity on the restraint of description might have been one of the key distinguishing points between C.S. Lewis and, say, his good friend J.R.R. Tolkien. But we might get into rants and debates on that. So here's the first question for you, as well as for the folks that might be watching. Reading Narnia, how have you engaged in Narnia as a reader? And has that changed over time for you as you may have continued to read it as an adult? How have you experienced Narnia over the years?
Okay, I'll go first. Since I came to it relatively late and I read it and I said, okay, because I was more used to Tolkien, as you just said, very dense, lots of description. And it was a very different style. And I knew that from reading Perry Landry books that Lewis was a little bit more terse. So in reading it, I felt like I wanted more depth, and then I ended up teaching it. And the students who came to it they had read it as children, and these are college students, and that they really, really enjoyed it and talked about how much it meant to them and how it really it created a lot of interesting parallels in their own lives and decision making and whatnot. So I began to have a greater appreciation for what it does to the younger reader. And in working with it along the way now, I said, well, it's time for a reread for all of this to see what else I can dig at. So I have grown more in appreciation of it than I had. I liked it originally, but I think I like it more now, in working with it.
We don't have to go around the horn, just if you have thoughts on this, how you've experienced it.
Well, so I'll go ahead and jump in for a second. As I mentioned in my introduction, I actually read Tolkien as a child before I read the Chronicles of Narnia. So I'm not sure if Tolkien simply set my expectations in a particular direction. Although I have always really enjoyed Narnia, it never resonated with me with the kind of depth that Tolkien did. So that's the book that I tend to always go back to. I have reread at least some of the Narnia series, the Pevensey books. I'm attached, I guess, to the Pevensies. So those are the books that I tend to reread, although certainly not the kind of rereadings that I've done of Tolkien. Nowhere close.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I would say for myself, talking about Chronicles of Narnia, it like I said, it was one of the probably the first real fantasy books that I had ever read in my life, and it, going back to it as an adult, it definitely had struck me, kind of how you mentioned it's not friendly toward the gas, towards all these digressions and reflections on yourself. And it seems just so straightforward, like he is being original without trying to be original. Like he is just writing down his thoughts and creating the coolest story he can think of without trying to make it a reflection of the times, even though you can definitely see, hints of the world wars in there. But, he's making this story and he's trying to make it as amazing as possible. And that's kind of what I see when I go back to it.
Yeah, and that's as amazing as possible as part of that critique of allegory. And I honestly, Tolkien was notorious for rejecting. I think Lewis would have too, in a lot of ways, strangely, even though Narnia is clearly much more referential to Christianity than Tolkien is, overtly so. So that good story. I just am here to tell a good story. Was kind of that motivation. Jeff on the chat has commented that his first introduction was actually in the BBC series in the late 70s, I guess it was.
Oh yeah.
So any of you come to Narnia, or have you seen that old series?
Yeah, I did. I don't remember much about it, but in doing prep for this, I said, I wish I had a copy of it, because it'd be interesting to see it, because I did see the films that were more recently done, and I'd like to do some kind of comparison. But I also just wanted to talk about some of the inspiration, and having been at the kilns, it is set off from the road. It's very, very, almost not quite bucolic, but it's remote in its own way, and I could see it being an inspiration, for the story itself. When the children that he housed during the Blitz came to him, as a matter of fact, and the research, they came to him. The three girls that he took care of came to his house in 1939, September 2nd. It's only a few days ago, so we're having an interesting anniversary. So that's when they showed up. But lots of things can inspire, and it's always interesting to see interpretation in terms of the movies and the BBC series. So does anybody have a clearer memory of it? I just remember they liked it, and I thought it was inventive. That's old stuff. Yeah,
we had been reading Narnia before that TV series came out. So it's always fun to see that a book that you really love, someone taking a run at it. Lewis was quite skeptical about, his comment was, he just couldn't conceive of Narnia and what he'd written ever being translated into a visual form. And he pointed out stuff like, the minute you get to talking animals, they become awfully cartoonish, which wasn't what he was going for. And so in his literal comment was, sometimes a book is just meant to be read. So, and yet.
Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar.
We had one comment already from Jonathan Brantley. Hey, Jonathan, you hashtagged it Justice for Susan.
That's my friend.
We will get to the Justice for Susan conversation, we hope. And Laura, your daughter Miranda has commented that, and this may be the experience for many young readers, is that it was just a good story. I I wasn't looking for any kind of Christian allegory or application. I was just enjoying the story. And so, when Aslan says stuff like, "You wouldn't be calling to me if I wasn't calling you," it's just what a cool idea. So, yeah.
I would say that I didn't see that allegory either, at least not until I hit the last battle.
Okay, right.
Which was a very difficult read for me as a child. In fact, it was so difficult and just heartbreaking to read. My memory of it is that I cried for like 80% of the book, and I swore I would never read that book again as long as I live. We'll see if I actually can keep that promise to myself. But that was, I think at some point during that read, I finally recognized what was going on. It took a long time through that book, but it's like, oh, but I was still crying. So
it is a hard book.
Mm.
It is a hard book compared to the others. It's like, where's the happy ending here?
Sure.
Why is this monkey so effective?
I mean, yeah. For me, that last book was, I read it several times over the years because, you as you grow older, you have different perspective on what you do see in books and what you get out of them. I definitely am kind of the mindset that when I was much younger, I didn't really understand at all what I was reading. I read through the book and I was like, that was kind of weird. Like that doesn't follow the pattern of the other books at all. This is just, it's so out there. It's like maybe he's just done writing the series and he just wanted to be done. And then, getting older, I, moved into seeing the allegories and seeing the, Christian lessons going through there. And then as I get older again, as an author, but I definitely think he was trying to end the series. I think he was wanting to end the series. And so I kind of started, yeah, and I went back to that. So,
well, Dakota, that's interesting that you should say he's trying to end the series, but there is a line, I guess, like in the third book or something, where Aslan does say to Susan and Peter, like, you're basically done here, and so you're old enough to go on. So maybe he's decided, I'm done here. I'm old enough to go on. Aslan told me, you're done. That's it. Okay, who knows?
Totally.
So if you had to pick one, what's your favorite? If you're going to go back and read one, on Labor Day, what would it be?
Me?
Anyway.
Anybody. Oh, yeah, I don't know. Let's see.
For me, it's going to be Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe.
Same. Yeah, kind of where it all starts.
The Dawn Treader would be interesting too. The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, I believe, because Eustace is an interesting character. Yeah. So yeah.
Oh, Eustace.
He almost deserved it. Yes. Okay.
I think it's Magician's Nephew for me, but it's Magician's Nephew having read the stuff that came before. It's such a wonderful unfolding of more, finding out where the wardrobe comes from, finding out where the witch comes from, getting this idea of the rings and multiple worlds. And there you go, Dakota. We can talk about quantum physics right there.
There we go. Heck, yeah, we can get into some string theory and the multi-world idea. I really liked that. How, I do think that book probably left the largest impression on me as more of an adult, because you're taking this token, these rings, and you're going through these pools that are either shallow or deep, and it brings you into a world of a certain age, depending on the depth of the water, basically. And I thought it was very interesting how moving from one world to another pulled the evil from one world to the other, and I just thought that was cool. So it was cool to see kind of the background of the Lion, the Witch, and Wardrobe, where all this stuff started. Even though, yeah.
I'm gonna take us into the next question that I got for us, but it's a continuation, which is this: what just generally, we can talk about individual themes in a bit, but just generally, why do you think we see this kind of continuing popularity and fascination with Narnia?
I think it's because the idea of, it's a portal fantasy, which we're very popular now, but they've always been, like Alice in Wonderland, Neverland. anything you think of, you're taking it out of yourself and taking someplace else. You're just mentioning about the depth of water and changes. You're in a different reality, but that it just signifies there's no growth without change, and there's no change without consequences. And I think that people like the idea of escape, but then there's also that desire to come home with something learned. And if we keep it into the idea of children's stories, but any kind of story people like to read, that whole idea of growth in character, I think, is what's appealing, and that's why they continue to fascinate. It creates an amazing, artificial, but somehow believable within its context environment, and then it becomes, part and parcel of your own, unconscious reference. I think that's why they continue to fascinate. It takes you out of yourself and it brings you into yourself at the same time.
Like Dakota said a few minutes ago, it is a great story.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, every one of the books had, okay, for me, maybe except Last Battle, but they have a really good story at their core. Not that I have any kind of strong opinion or, anything, right? So there is this real strong story at the core of what's going on. And certainly from the standpoint, from my memories reading, picking up The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe for the first time, when I was 9 or 10 or however old I was, it's like, it's a cool place. I mean, first of all, wouldn't you love to, to stumble through the wardrobe, or, perhaps for my older nieces, their mother's closet. My nieces went on an expedition to look for Narnia through my sister's closet once. Ruined her favorite Italian shoes. But anyway, so who wouldn't love to do that? Suddenly you're in another world. It's a magic world. There are talking animals, for crying out loud. And you run into fawns, and okay, there's the witch, and she's pretty scary. All right. And then there's this incredible great lion. And then at the end of this story arc, you end up as a king or queen of Narnia, and so are always a king or queen of Narnia. So it's a real great yarn for kids to be able to put themselves in that and just get through those wonderful stories. And the children, of course, are the protagonists. And for kids, it's always, for any of us, of course, we want to see ourselves reflected in the protagonists of the story. So I think there's a lot of that. It's good stories, and it's a cool place with cool beings in it.
So one of the features of a story that lasts or endures, it takes on a classic adjective. It's become a classic. So I'm curious, there are lots of examples of those kinds of children's literature, which, if it works well, is also working at the adult level, I would argue. Mm-hmm. You might too. But whether it's Beatrix Potter or Lewis Carroll or Frank Baum or J.M. Barrie, so where would and also one of the inspirations for Lewis was George MacDonald, but where in that pantheon are there other of similar kinds of stories that have kind of gone to that classic stage for you, and does Narnia belong there?
I think so. I was thinking about this when we were discussing these particular questions, that I mentioned Peter Pan before, and also The Wizard of Oz, and particularly like Peter Pan and Oz, the protagonists, they get to experience a taste of adulthood, but not really, so it's a perceived taste of adulthood and this illusion of what they're doing. And then when they go home, everything is, they still have the experience internalized, but they can go back to childhood with a different eye. And I think that's kind of a painless learning experience you get in reading this. You don't even realize that's what's happening as a child, but some of that happens in the concept of Neverland. Certainly Dorothy comes back changed from Oz, and the children who come back from Narnia have that perception that they were kings and queens of Narnia. They actually surmounted, an evil, or especially Edmund in himself, changes. So I think that it falls into that kind of level of discourse, I think.
think another thing to think on is, and this is something that I do very frequently when I'm writing myself, is I say, what is something that's universal, and
Yeah.
you look at all of these different things, and I mean, while some things might not be truly universal, they're so widespread that it's might as well be. And one of those things, like look at Peter Pan. Who doesn't want to be young and forever? Who doesn't want to live forever and be young and have fun and have these adventures? And who doesn't want to go to, like you're saying, go to another world, be able to have your whole life come back and be a kid again? Like these are just a few of the concepts that I think really people are wanting to, because they think that, even if they don't know that they think that. So just another one of those things is the universality of things.
Let me stick with that. That idea of universality of concepts. I'm going to actually skip a little bit ahead here into these kinds of meaningful messages, kind of an idea. I am sharing, so make that big. So what are those kinds of universal ideas? What are the things that you think that Narnia deals with particularly either well or in a way that sticks with you? So I used this picture because it was the scene in The Lion, the Witch where we see a true redemption arc for the character Edmund. And so we want to resonate with forgiveness. We want to resonate with the fruit of repentance and restoration to family and friendship and those kinds of things. It's not the only one, but I am curious about what are those kinds of meaningful messages that stick with you all as you have experienced Narnia.
Yeah, I think that for me, and re-examining it, it seems to be the overarching message is that there can be change, and with change comes growth. And also that nothing is so dire, and no situation is so dire as to be truly hopeless. There's no other way to approach. And I think that's a big theme for our times too. So maybe there'll be a resurgence of popularity with other readers too for this kind of thing.
I think another big thing is kind of the idea that the good people win, and that you can do all of these, you can do so much, and you can help other people out. I think as a kid, it was more the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. It was the idea that you can have this adventure and no one gets hurt. It's kind of the idea, right? Like the witch will turn people to stone, but then Aslan can go along and free them later on in the book. Like all these people that were captured, everyone that was lost, Mr. Beaver, I think it was, or I forget, but it was the like the animals that helped them right away at the start all come back. So even though they're lost during the course of the story, you can have your friends back later, and that's kind of a thing that was great as a kid. Is that was one of those, even if you lose your friends for a while, you can get them back later. But obviously as an adult, different connotations, different meanings, and different thought patterns. So
yeah, and so in that case, Mr. Tumnus, who was one of those that got turned into stone by the White Witch, does come back. But even in that story, and you could argue whether he was really a villain or not, but that idea of redemption, the forces that create betrayal, but then regret and repentance from that, and so on. So again, powerful ideas. Laura, any particular?
Yeah, so the three words that I wrote down on my notes, and you guys have already kind of brought these into the discussion, are faith, sacrifice, and redemption.
Right.
And how closely bound together all of those things are. And in terms of Narnia, when I think of faith, one of the characters that I think of first and foremost is Lucy, the one who, the first one.
I'm freezing up. Crap.
The first one to find.
Hello?
I can hear you, Constance. So Lucy is the first one to find Narnia. and the first one to really believe in Narnia. When they come back in Prince Caspian, she's the first one to see Aslan. So Lucy has this faith in Narnia. And of course, those intertwined themes of sacrifice, of betrayal, sacrifice, and redemption. And when we get to our rants, of course, my rant is Edmund is the best. And because this is what really resonates with me in that character, and just themes that keep coming back through many characters, through many of the books, which of course makes sense because these are very deeply Christian themes that are central touchstones to the faith.
We have lost Constance for a moment. Unlike real Dragon Con, people cannot literally be sucked out of the room at any point in time. In this case, with the vagaries of Zoom connections. Hopefully Constance will join us back.
That would be an interesting feature to add into in-person cons in the future.
Either a trap door or an ejection seat.
That's right.
We'll think about that. Because we've started talking about this too, I'll go to another question, which is an easy one, kind of favorite characters. Because one of the things that clearly Narnia has is lots of interesting characters, not all human. You get everything from an embodied star to Aslan to even villain characters that are written with some dimension to them, as far as whether it's King Miraz or the White Witch in particular. So I'm curious, what are some of your favorite and enduring characters? Who would you like to go out to lunch with or dinner with?
I'm going to go with Reepicheep the mouse.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, what was that?
Tell us why.
Well, he was basically Puss in Boots, but a mouse, right? So, he is a dashing, man of the seas, and he was like kind of the quintessential rogue, but then also reduced to a mouse, So how is a mouse cool? You just had to look at Reepicheep.
Right.
And so that was kind of a fun thing for me. Again, remember, these are the first fantasy books I ever read. I was probably 8 or 9 years old. So coming up from there, like Reepicheep is always in my head. Like, all right, this is a fun character. And
it is.
Yep, it is.
Yeah, he was the original. Even the smallest can change the course of the world kind of characters. It's incredibly brash, bold, honor-bound, chivalric mouse, for crying out loud. So. Yeah, what a wonderful character.
Yes. So for a lunch date, I would probably need to go with Mr. Tumnus.
Yeah.
He just seems like he would be a really fun person to go to lunch with.
Plays a mean set of pipes.
Absolutely, that's right. And you can have lunch and then dancing afterwards.
There you
go. Yeah. Your daughter is with you on that one too. It looks like. Give me tea with Mr. Tumnus all day, she says. But Melanie Shanks wrote The Beavers, Brave, and yeah, I think that would be pretty cool to. I hope they serve more than wood chips, and it seemed like they did. But I love the line, Mr. Beaver or Mrs. Beaver, one of them. They ask about Aslan and is he safe, and their response, of course he isn't safe. He's the king, I tell you. He's not safe, but he's good. And so their kind of homely, honest, down-to-earth perspective grounds you right away in that world of Narnia.
Beavers are kind of the hobbits of Narnia.
Yeah. I do like that.
Yeah.
Sorry. Can keep
Go ahead.
No. I was going to say they were probably, I think, in the series, probably the most self-sacrificing characters of the books were the beavers, and that's one of those other things that why it stuck with me earlier. Like the queen is coming, and we're still going to house you, we're still going to feed you, we're going to hide you, we're going to help you escape, and even though it might cost them everything, like if the queen's wolves are out, so. Yeah. So, yep. Just probably another allusion to the World Wars, you know, going on at the time.
It looks like Constance is trying to get back in. Constance, if you can hear us, I don't see you in the waiting room. So try to go back in and sign on Zoom again. Oh, Jonathan wants to share a meal with Jadis, the White Witch. He's going right to high DEFCON 5, dangerous lunching.
Yeah, boy, that's brave. But Jadis is a fascinating character. I'm not sure I want to have lunch with her, though.
Yeah.
I mean, you can get some Turkish delight, you can get some apples of immortality. I don't know what's the issue here.
So I'm hoping someone can help Constance get back on. She's tried. Someone send her a new link, but I can't do that. I don't know. We're going to keep going. And Constance, we'll look for you over there. We just can't see you. So
the suggestion was made to add her as a panelist. Do you need to
Yeah,
re-add her?
yeah, she's not in the waiting room that I can
All right.
See, I was saying
I'll
that
shut
as
up.
add Jadis as a panelist. I was like, I don't think that's gonna happen.
Oh man. Now that I would go for.
Yeah, let's see. No, I don't have her in attendees or panelists. So I'm going to keep going. Hopefully our crack tech team will figure out how to help Constance get back in. Yeah, another question. So Narnia has fascinating characters. I'm interested in kind of storyline themes that might have been particular favorites of yours, things that are memorable that you know come to mind in given situations. And I'm especially interested, are there any obscure scenes like that are especially neat for you?
That is a good question.
Yeah, I haven't really been able to think of something obscure.
Right.
It doesn't have to be obscure.
Mm-hmm. I definitely think it's interesting for me how. So I think obviously most of what we discuss comes from personal experience and such. So it's definitely interesting to see how the four children can come back. What is hundreds or long period of time after their original reign and their children again, and no one really recognizes or believes who they are until the one person speaks out for them, right? And I think that's very interesting because I do kind of see that in our lives, right? Because who walks into a room and knows everyone there, or who is actually someone in a room that's very important, and no one even bothers until someone points, like no one bothers to talk to them, pay attention until someone with a high position of authority walks in and says, you guys here, you're missing this person over here. And so it's just one of those interesting things to kind of think of in kind of different ways. Like, yes, they're children again, so they should probably be listening to the people around them, but they were also the kings and queens, so people should be listening to them. So it's just a very interesting dichotomy that you're trying to follow. So that's just kind of one of those obscure things that hits me. Yep.
Any favorite storylines for you, Laura?
Well, it's this is gonna sound like I have this weird obsession. I always end up coming back around to Edmund.
Okay.
And he, for me, he is. This is part of my Edmund is the best rant. But through The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, he has the best character arc. And throughout, really a lot of really all the books where we see the Pevensies, of course, in Horse and His Boy, they're kind of secondary background characters, but. Edmund is one of the most, if not the most well-developed characters in all of the books. And it's just really fascinating to see where he starts and where he ends up. And I'll leave more of that material for my Edmund is the best rant later on.
Sure.
I don't want to use up all my good stuff right now, but
We'll get to that. We'll get to that.
that's one of the things that's always bringing me back, when I revisit these books. And I'm sure that's why I reread, that set of 3 books, Lion and Prince Caspian and Dawn Treader, is because that's the book. Those are the books that he's in the most. And I think he's just the best character.
Yeah. We've had several folks on the chat line on YouTube talk about The Horse and His Boy as being their favorite story. And so there's a lot that could be explored there. There's a lot potentially controversial. That might be one of our rants at some point around Horse and His Boy in terms of how Lewis has displayed a more Middle Eastern kind of a culture and used it in a villainous way. Not entirely. You still have Erebus, who is eventually redeemable in that story, but there is a lot of good content and great thoughts and moments in that story. For me, it hasn't gotten any love yet, but I really do love the Silver Chair as a storyline, as a complete storyline. And so you show up. There's kind of intrigue and mystery. It introduces characters like Puddleglum to the mix, and and you get another evil character in the Green Witch, and Narnia. All of Narnia is at risk. So in some ways, for me, it's really a complete storyline that has lots of memorable moments as well. Yeah. So I'm going to push on to another idea here, which is what similar as we've talked about favorite characters, favorite storylines. We described early on that the whole story for Lewis began with an image. So I'm interested in what are your kind of favorite in your mind visual images. It could be an image that has been actually portrayed either in the TV series or the movies or in art. Pauline Baynes was the original illustrator, and for many publications, Narnia is still, her illustrations are Narnia for many of us. And these are all Pauline Baynes illustrations of the Castle of Paravel, Cair Paravel, or the sledge, or finally spring after always winter, but never Christmas. So any particular images for Narnia, either for you or for folks that are watching?
Well, certainly the lamppost is iconic, especially when we first encounter it in that frozen, snowy landscape. And for me too, it's another one, maybe not so much, I guess it's an image, that frozen Narnia that has been, under the thumb of the White Witch for so very long, always winter, never Christmas. And then the sudden thaw when Aslan returns. That's a real interesting idea to me, that transition from the rule of the witch, and now the lion is back, and game on.
And here comes spring.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's right. I think for me, Cair Paravel was always a big thing, because I was a big Camelot fan, and that's always kind of how I definitely conflated the two. Like, this is going to be like the image just in my head when that happened is the exact same image I have in my head when I think of Camelot. So it's just a very big thing in my head, I suppose.
Right.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Jim.
This was one of the reasons I love the Dawn Treader. It's more episodic, and so you get wonderful scenes and storylines, and especially images. So the image of a golden statue at the bottom of a lake, and then you find out wasn't a statue, or the image of an island that's impenetrably covered with darkness, that you sail in and then finally you see an albatross, or the image of this final wave in a sweet sea covered with flowers and vast mountains rising up in the distance, or the image of running further in and further up in the book which we shall not name for Laura. But this,
Okay, it's okay. I can handle it.
the idea of everything becoming more and more real. And some of those images are ones that you have to imagine. It's like, okay, so we've already seen whatever the super high frame rate that Peter Jackson used in The Hobbit. Can we use an even higher frame rate and make this look even more real to ourselves? So so there's so much of an imagination that gets captured. And as you said, all the way back to that very first image, it was fascinating to read or listen to some of the background stories of how the children in the Andrew Adamson movie, especially Lucy, they blindfolded her and then picked her up and dropped her in the middle of the set, which was huge and amazing, to have her experience that snowy entry to Narnia fresh, so that they could get her reaction on film. And that's the kind of imagery that is so striking and memorable for us. Yeah.
I didn't have notes like you do. I mean, you're saying all this. I'm just sitting here like, oh yes, talk more. It's beautiful.
Yeah. So let's see if I have any other reasons for why this thing sticks with us. Memorable images, memorable characters. Yeah, so it has been converted to the screen, television screen, as we said back in the BBC, in actually 1988 through 90. They only I think they did 3 episodes. No, they combined. It was 3 episodes, but they combined Silverchair and Prince Caspian, I think, or Prince Caspian and Dawn Treader. I'd have to go back and look. And then we got 3 movies in 2005 to 2010, Lion Witch, Caspian, and Dawn Treader. Have you seen any other versions, or do you have favorite images or representations of Narnia as it's been translated from book to film?
I think, I always thought they were just movies, but I guess I probably saw the original. I probably saw the original like series, if that's what they actually were. So, and it was. I think I liked those best. I think that they look definitely more beautiful with the more modern ones, but there's something to be said for just that original, like, you pull the note off the wall and all of a sudden the snarling wolf face is right in front of you shouting the words on it, So I think that was pretty cool for me.
Yeah, I can't think of other video or film versions that I've seen. I don't know if there are others out there. Of course, the supposed Netflix adaptation coming up that we really don't know very much about at this point. If it ever happens. But I remember the TV series, but only vaguely. I'll have to look and see if it's probably on YouTube. Certainly the style of it, another series, I mean, totally different, but it was made at about the same time and very much the same style as the Box of Delights. And I watch that all the time. That's on YouTube. So the Lewis stories might be out there as well. And certainly I remember the more modern films. And the modern film, the Adamson films really they're quite pretty. The design is nice. They look good. There are things that I think that, like with any adaptation, right, that I think they do really well, and things that maybe were a little strange. So I mean, for me, the biggest thing being, why is Prince Caspian so grown up?
Because he had to have a little love relationship with Susan. So we had,
yeah, apparently.
Melanie says, I walked out of the theater when Prince Caspian kisses Susan. So,
Ouch.
and it's again, for some of us, that's we have different lines that can be crossed for when the translation from book to movie goes too far. And honestly, you could have directorial integrity, and then all of a sudden the studios say, we need a love scene in here. So this isn't a Hobbit panel, but we could rant on that one for a while. But in Narnia, Caspian needed to be older, and then you create a little romantic interest between him and Susan. It's nowhere to be found in the books, nor was it intended, I think. But you got to wonder, Douglas Gresham's along and saying, well, okay, as long as we get the other content, Aslan is not some jerk animated lion thing. So.
Yeah, I remember when I first saw Adamson's Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe, I was, before I saw it, I was really apprehensive about what the talking lion was going to look like, in this live action film. So I was a little nervous, but I thought that he actually ended up being very nicely done. I was really quite convinced, and I was certainly happy with the voice talent they chose for him. Yeah. I very much enjoyed Liam Neeson's voice as the Great Lion. So I remember being nervous about that.
Yeah. Why are the Telmarines weirdly Spanish? One of the questions from YouTube.
It's a good question.
Very good question.
Well, just because they are. There you go. Yep. Well, the Telmarines are linked to pirates in the Caribbean, I guess. And they came through a cave portal. So I guess you could say they were sort of Spanish Main type characters. But, you make design choices. We actually, my wife Emily and I got to go to Czechoslovakia, the Czech Republic, there you go, and see Prince Caspian get filmed for a day. We won a little contest, but that's not part of this thing. But it was the sets, and whether they were small sets and throne room kinds of scenes, for this vast castle set, which we see in the movie with an attack on Caspian's or on Miraz's castle. It was remarkable, the amount of talent and craftsmanship that went into those movies, and made for memorable images for many of us. Okay, we only have about 6 or so minutes, 5 minutes, so we're going to go to rant time. And unfortunately, we don't have Constance here to do her rant, so she can rant in the chat, or we can take up arms ourselves as well. So here's the first rant. Justice for Susan. We'll invite the whole panel in to talk about this if you would like. But, all the family gets wiped out by a train, slashed, pulled into Narnia at long last, and Susan is left because she became too enamored with lipstick and stockings and stuff. Whatever happened to Susan? Ran away. Ran away, folks.
Well, go ahead.
No, go on.
Oh, okay. So I say she just didn't die. At that point, she was still alive. And time in Narnia runs faster than time on Earth. So yeah, even though she's too enamored with lipstick and nylons and invitations, it was more of a, hey, because of that, she wasn't with our family at the time we all died. And that's more what I think is going on there than she's too much of a woman now. It's not worth our time. No, I don't think that was accurate.
So I don't know, and of course, I mean, this has been a bit of a kind of ongoing discussion, right? And I believe that at some point Lewis himself said something to the effect of, well, just because she didn't make it to Aslan's country then doesn't mean that she doesn't ultimately get there.
Right. And that was definitely my thoughts on that. Yeah, it's just because she's too enamored. That like I said, she's too enamored with these things. So she was doing her own thing when we all got killed and pulled into Narnia. That's how I always read it. So I was very surprised when I first read. People were like, oh yeah, they don't accept her into Narnia because she's become a woman or she's grown up and put away these childish things. I was like, I don't know, guys. Just kind of looks like she didn't die. I mean, that's pretty much what I'm seeing there.
It was interesting. I got to interview Anna Popplewell here at DragonCon a couple years ago. She was here, and that obviously came up. We even had a panel called. It was probably called. I think it was called "The Trouble with Susan." It should have probably been called "Justice for Susan," but she pointed out in that separate panel that Neil Gaiman has written the story, sort of the post last battle story of Susan, and I think that was actually an encouragement to Anna Popplewell. You know, in other words, she has a different arc. We don't exactly know where it goes with the arc, and the fact for me that Lewis chose to not have all 4 children sort of just come in automatically, it created more complexity at the end of the story that allowed for, people to say, well, there are different paths here, and some paths are longer and more complex, and we don't know. It's kind of back to the horse and his boy, where Aslan tells Erebus, I'm not telling her story, talking about her maidservant. I'm only telling yours. So Shasta and Erebus get that message clearly. And so we don't know the rest of Susan's story, but justice for Susan. All right, we're going to go to the next one, which is Edmund is the best.
Yes. Well, so I've already previewed. This is mine. I've already previewed a lot, so it should be very clear to everyone by now that I think Edmund is a super cool character. Just within that short, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I mean, these books are not terribly long, right? He has such an excellent character arc. Just think of where he starts. He's a spiteful, mean-spirited, selfish boy, selfish child. And by the end of the book, he has already largely transformed into a loyal, courageous, mature, logically minded young person. It's an amazing transformation. And in other books, he often is the voice of Narnia outside the boundaries, right? He does a lot of negotiations on behalf of Narnia. And one of the most important roles in my mind that he serves is as the voice of reason and calm, the cooling water on Peter's hot brashness, because Peter can really get ramped up fast, and Edmund is there to calm him down. And of course, through all of this, he still kind of really remains haunted by his betrayal, way back in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. So he's always haunted by it, but he just becomes one of the most steadfast kinds of characters you would ever want to know. So that's why I think Edmund is the best.
We want to welcome back Constance Wagner.
Hey.
Yeah, I went through a wardrobe a couple of minutes ago, and now I'm back. Okay.
Welcome back.
Thank you. I was listening the whole time, but it just wouldn't let me back in. My screen was blank. That's why I was in a snowstorm. So winter is still going on in Narnia.
That's what happens when you have lunch with Jadis, I guess.
I know. I mean, I heard some of people were apprehending my rant there about having lunch with the White Witch and whatnot. But I'm glad to be back for the closing comments. I have to tell you that.
So one quick thing. The problem with Susan, we ought to give Constance at least 30 seconds to rant if you would like. We tried to rant our best for you, but if you Google Neil Gaiman, Gaiman, the problem of Susan, you can find sources for his story.
Okay, but I can take 30 seconds to point out something that people may not be aware of. There's a wonderful piece of fan fiction, the name of which I cannot forget, but if you type in Susan and Harry Potter meet. Okay, you will see this very short piece where it talks about how Harry meets after everything is resolved with Voldemort, that he meets this old woman in a cafe, and it's Susan, and they become friends, and she finds out that they both have this magical connection, and they discuss what it's like to be insiders and outsiders in magical worlds, and how people just don't appreciate their contribution. It's very interesting. It's very weepy, So again, justice for Susan. She deserves to go back in because all she did was attempt to grow up and deal with the trauma of the war and her family dying and whatnot. So it doesn't seem quite fair. But I know you can make a case for both sides. Okay.
So Laura, we let you rant on this, and we've bumped up against our time. I'm just going to have one more rant for us, which is the book order rant.
Okay.
And some of you have already brought this up on the chat panel, but here's the deal. Read the stories in the order that the Brits publish them, not the twisted heresy that is the American published order. These books are meant to be read in the order published. Read The Magician's Nephew as number 6, not number 1. Please. And I wish the American publishers would get that into their mind. You can always white out the numbers in a multi-book set, but especially if you're going to publish, a combined big fat Narnia, would you please put it back in the order that the Brits and the Lord intended? That is.
And the Lord, yes, and as intended, okay? Jim, did you notice the message we just got that we have extra time if we want it?
Oh, no, I did not notice that.
It all presents. It came from DragonCon, not from my mouth, because I got that from Narnia when I was there a few minutes ago.
I think you're right. If the panelists are okay with us hanging out.
Sure.
I would certainly like to have some more time. So.
Yeah. We'll stop that.
Well, we're in Narnia. Time runs differently here.
Time runs differently. Yes, it does. I guess I can attest that since I wished us there. Okay. Here's what I want to mention.
We actually have a bit of a break on the high fantasy schedule. So we don't have a panel that's bumping up against ours that's starting right at I guess it would be 4:00. So our next high fantasy panel, for those who like it, is going to happen at 5:30 this afternoon Eastern time, a 30th anniversary of the Wheel of Time. So
yay!
Big anniversary year.
Yeah, it seems to be.
They have 40 years to catch up on us, but.
I would like to mention something that when you were talking about images before, while I was listening, while I was trying 15 different ways to get in, back here, with, I guess, the different space-time continuums that I was traveling in. But some of you may have known, I know that Jim, you know him, but Jeff Murray, who died a few years ago, wonderful artist of Tolkien and Narnia. One of the images that always stuck with me was the painting he did of Reepicheep, which I thought was really wonderful. And I wanted to find it to show, but I'm not risking doing anything on the screen for now. So I'm trying to find it to share, but maybe with your magic, Jim, you can find it. But it is a painting of Reepicheep. And I think when he's getting ready to go across the ocean into the true Narnia, perhaps, I'm not quite sure, but it was so poignant. And I very much equate that picture with Jeff, whom I miss a great deal, as I'm sure we all do. Miss his talent and his friendship, very gentle soul, died much too soon. But he had a real deep connection with those books. I mean, he really was invested in the Christian elements of it. And I wish I could find a picture right now to show you. But if you look in his catalog, I'm sure you'll find it, the Reepicheep thing. So that's an image that somebody else created after reading it. But I know you were talking about images that stuck with you from the books themselves. And that at this point, that's kind of mixed up in my mind, Jeff's picture and then reading the books. But I think that one of the things that stayed with me is probably the first appearance of the White Witch, whom I find to be an interesting character. And I heard that, you're going to lunch with the White Witch, as I thought about that. I would like to have brunch with the White Witch and with Susan and I together. We could be ladies who lunch, who discuss, different perceptions of what people expect from us. And I thought that would be an interesting, look at that. There it is. Okay. I mean, that's so sweet, you know, it's his sketches. It's really, that's one thing they did. I think he also did a painting. This may have been, he may have done a larger version of that. But I mean, the expression on Rupert Sheep's face is just wonderful, you know, on this coracle. And it just has this real meditative quality about it. So his work was so beautiful. When he painted, he used a lot of blues and whatnot. So that's a great background to show it against, you know, which leads me to ask a question of the panel, you know, in terms of that, if I can just step into your role for a minute, Jim, here. I mentioned that Harry Potter crossover fan fiction. Is there anything that you've read or seen pictures of that fans have done? I mean, Jeff's is a professional, obviously, but that somehow enhances the experience for you. Have you read much fan fiction in relation to this? And maybe somebody in the chat has something to offer also if they're still on. You know?
I wouldn't say so much fan fiction, but I definitely see elements of things kind of spawning all over in, you know, different areas of literature. So if we look at like The Horse and His Boy, right? So we have, you know, even the title by itself. So it's clear that the horse is the one in this relationship that is in control, and the boy is just along for the ride.
Mm-hmm.
And if you've read anything by I believe it's Mercedes Lackey, so that would be like the Valdemar series.
Mm-hmm.
So I see that as, you know, like you have your the heralds and the you know, the heralds are the horses and the rider, but the horse is the one in control, and the herald, the person riding, is just there so that they can interact with the rest of the country, basically. And it's just like, and I see that, I'm like, that's just The Horse and His Boy, but turned into a massive series by itself. Like, I mean, of course I love that. I've read pretty much every book, but it's just, you know, just how I see that spawn elsewhere. I think it's very interesting.
Yeah, that seems to be something that, particularly among the Inklings, and they influenced each other with ideas, and also people who inspired them. You know, I think, Jim, when you were showing things on the screen before about different books in the Pantheon, and there was George MacDonald, you know, and then of course we had Charles Williams play The Place of the Lion, and things like that. The one thing just feeds into another, and then one of Tolkien's discussions is that he felt that, you know, Lewis used some elements of his ideas in there about the talking trees and things like that. Mm-hmm. And so somehow it's like, well, it's in tribute. But no, you're ripping me off. I'm not quite sure how that argument ended up, you know, but yeah, okay. So, Laura, you look like you have an opinion.
I was agreeing. Well, so I mean, what I've been thinking is that it's difficult, I suppose, probably for people like us who do read these books over and over and over and over again, but it's difficult not to see echoes and reflections of authors like Tolkien and Lewis in so many things that came afterwards. As, you know, they really were, you know, trailblazers of basically a new genre. To large extent, not completely new, but with what it has now become. So yeah, the ripples certainly run far and wide. They just keep spreading out.
Jeffrey Bernard says, not a horse, it's a companion. I don't know if that's a Doctor Who reference.
No, that's so the companion is what the horse is in Valdemar series. Sorry, they're specifically not horses. They're I think they're supposed to be some kind of like basically angelic being in the form of a horse. Okay. So yeah, so specifically not horses, they're companions. He is correct. Sorry about that.
We have clarified that. So here's a last question for us. So we do need to wrap up. So favorite quotes. Are there any particular lines from the book that you find yourself coming to mind or even using with people? This is a question for those that are watching as well. So here we go. Okay. We'll just say, you know, we'll have Aslan at the core.
So there were a couple. I mean, there are so many for me really memorable quotes, you know, that I could pick out, but there are just a couple. One of my favorites, because it's just absolute truth. No great wisdom can be reached without sacrifice. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's, in what realm of life is that not true? one that's a little more personal for me, I guess, is this is from Magician's Nephew, and it goes, children have one kind of silliness, as you know, and grown-ups have another kind. Now, in context, this was actually being applied in a rather disparaging way, you know, of Uncle Andrew, right? But the way that I hear this in my own head is that it's more of a reminder to allow myself to lapse into that childlike kind of mindset. Yeah, that to keep the imagination alive and vivid. And so, and it just besides the whole idea of, you know, I guess what the inner child expression, right? It really also speaks to my heart of hearts as a fan, right? Because that really is the a lot of what being a fan is about. And then the one that I actually have used, although, you know, I do tend to favor Tolkien quotes, but the one that I've actually used is, "Do not cite the deep magic to me, which I was there when it was written." I usually delete the which, but I actually used that quote some time back when a student tried to correct me on a point of information of Middle Earth geography. The student was 100% wrong. I know, it's like, the other students practically gasped because they figured the student didn't know what he had just stepped into. But anyway, so I called on a quote from Lewis to react to the student questioning my knowledge and authority. In that case, it was about Tolkien.
I think I used that quote during our initial conversation. I was
You
like,
did.
Yes, you did.
Sure. For me, I think a big quote that I use is shoot, I'm trying to remember exactly. I'm trying to remember exactly what it was, but I think it was to Caspian. I think it was Aslan to Caspian. He was talking. He said, "Do you feel sufficient to take up the kingship?" Oh. And Caspian goes, I don't think I am." And Aslan says, "Good, because if you that's proof that you are." Right. And I think for a lot of people, especially who have started careers, or someone like me who's an author and, you know, kind of doing their own thing without any visual way of knowing, you know, people's reactions to things, you kind of have that feeling of imposter syndrome. You kind of have that those times where it can be hard to think like, yes, I'm doing okay, I'm doing well. And then you just kind of, you know, if you have this, you can reference that and it says, hey, am I doing okay? Yeah. And if you thought you were, if you were a kind of a cocky bastard, pardon my mouth here, then it would be proof that you aren't. But since you are wondering that, it's proof that you are, you know, doing well. So yeah, kind of a roundabout way of saying I like that quote.
Yeah.
I have to say that, Laura, I have never used that deep magic quote, but perhaps I will employ it in the future, you know, because it's good. It can apply to lots of different things. But I like the once a king and queen of Narnia, always a king and queen of Narnia, and as a literary idea, because it does actually cement the lesson of that this is an experience about growth. And it does remind me of tipping over into Lord of the Rings when the hobbits return to the Shire and they're surprised when Gandalf is leaving them at the gate, more or less, you know, and not going to help them anymore. And it's like, what do you mean you're not going to come in and help us clean it up? And he's like, well, that's what you were trained for. You know, you're old enough to take care of your own business, you know. So that kind of relates in that way, I think.
Yeah, some of the other quotes that are coming on the YouTube feed. Remember that all worlds draw to an end, and that noble death is a treasure which no one is too poor to buy. Yeah, the Corsi isn't safe, but he's good line. Once a king or queen of Narnia, always a king or queen. In these COVID times, you know, the living in a land that's always winter and never Christmas is particularly meaningful. And there's a wonderfully sweet and heart-stirring scene, and I'm not going to remember the exact quote, but it's in The Magician's Nephew. And Diggory has returned, and he's experiencing the grief of his mother dying, which was very personal for Lewis because Lewis's mother died when he was young. And when Aslan explains to Diggory that they're the only two in this world so far that know what grief is. And so such a poignant and important, I think, moment, which is one of the reasons that I think Narnia is so enduring as well. That it's not, there are dangerous elements in any true fairy story. I think it was Lewis who said, the reason that they have dragons in them is because we need to learn that dragons can be beaten. And so those images that someday the pandemic will end, that Christmas will be over, that there will be consolation, however deep the grief is right now. And it's like Aslan reaching over to Diggory and saying, I understand. And I weep with you. So, and Narnia brings that. For my professor friends, one of my favorite quotes, what do they teach them at these schools?
Depends. If you're in Starfleet Academy, it's one set of laws. If you're at Rivendell University, it's another. I don't know. It depends.
Well, all right. We've gone 15 minutes over. Bonus time, extra innings at the High Fantasy Track and in Narnia. We're really glad that all of you have joined us. Thank you to our panelists. I'm glad, Constance, you made your way back through the wardrobe.
I got stuck in a coat in the wardrobe and I had to fight my way through the furs. Okay.
That, or you were on a ship somewhere or dived through a painting. We don't know how. Really glad that you were joining with us. Anything that you'd like to say about your Mountaindale work?
Yeah, Mountaindale. Yeah, I mean, come check us out. We have awesome books, awesome authors, and not too much terribly else to say. I mean, it's a new kind of fantasy, but it's also going back to this. It's similar in that it's portal fantasy, and we're always looking for those similar things, those universal things that everyone loves in books. And so hopefully you'll come there and find something universal that you love. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So we hope that you will all be back again. Our next panel in High Fantasy is the Wheel of Time 30th anniversary. It'll be streaming here on YouTube at 5:30 this afternoon. And then later tonight, we're going to make a map of Dragon Con with my friend, the Cave Geek. And he's going to use some of his art and he is going to be interactive. So you'll have to help, which is over on his Twitch channel. So look for that later tonight. Glad you joined us. Thanks, team. And once a panelist in Narnia, always a panelist in Narnia.
Panelist in Narnia.
Oh.
Very good, Jim. Very good. So, and like I said,